Just hours before my daughter's big dance competition, my sister-in-law ripped her dress. But then, people think sabotage only happens in high-stakes business or politics. They don't expect it to come from someone who shares your dinner table on Thanksgiving or who holds your newborn like they're part of your tribe. But that's the thing about betrayal. It rarely comes from strangers. It's always the ones who smile, the widest in family photos. My name is Skylar Stecker. I'm 29, and I live in Austin, Texas with my husband Evan and our 2 kids. I run a small artisan bakery downtown and teach yoga classes part-time NK. Most of my days are filled with the kind of chaos that's easy to love: flour in my hair, sticky notes everywhere, and a dozen half-done playlists for my morning classes. But none of that compares to what I feel watching my daughter Isla dance. Isla is 12, and she moves like she was born to music. She doesn't just follow choreography. She tells stories with her body. Her dance teacher, Sophia, once said Isla has the kind of presence on stage that makes judges forget to take notes. That might sound like a mother's bias, but Sophia's not one for flattery. She danced professionally in Europe before moving here to run the Crescent Studio. Isla has been training there for almost 5 years now. Dance became a second language for her, and for me. A second chance. I used to dance too. Not professionally, but seriously. I made it to the Texas Regional Showcase back when I was 17. Before a fall during rehearsal, tore up my left ankle and closed that door permanently. I went on to culinary school instead. Met Evan. Had Isla. And eventually turned all that creative energy into cakes, crusts, and quiet contentment. But when Isla started twirling in the kitchen at age 4, barefoot and laughing, something in me lit back up. I didn't push. I promised myself I never would. But she chose dance with a clarity I didn't even have at her age. And from that moment, I knew I'd support her in every way I could. We adjusted our schedules, cut back where we had to, even skipped vacations to afford coaching, costumes, and competitions. And it was all building up to one moment: the Texas Rising Dance Invitational, the biggest stage Isla had ever been on. Top scouts would be in the audience, and the scholarship prizes were enough to make any middle-class parent take a deep breath before signing the registration forms. My sister-in-law Layla knew all of this. She'd been at every family dinner where I talked about Isla's rehearsals or costume fittings. Her twin daughters, Noelle and Nova, danced too. They were a year older than Isla, technically in the same competitive tier, though the styles they chose, mostly acro and jazz, were very different from Isla's contemporary focus. From the outside, Layla seemed supportive. She brought protein bars to recitals and complimented Isla's turns with just enough enthusiasm to sound polite. But over time, I began noticing how the edges of her praise were sharp. "Isla's so expressive," she once said. "You don't even notice the little flaws in her footwork." Or, "Your costume choice is brave." Most moms would be afraid that much leg would draw attention to the turnout. That kind of kindness. The kind you unwrap only to find a thorn inside. Layla married my younger brother Jacob 6 years ago. She's the type who hosts baby showers with personalized candles and says things like, "I'm just very detail-oriented," when what she really means is I must win every interaction. We never really clicked. But I tried. For my brother's sake. For the kids. But something in her always treated Isla's success like an insult to her own daughters. Like she couldn't clap for Isla without shrinking her twins in the process. The passive jabs escalated, gradually: missing shoes, misprinted schedules. Rehearsal times conveniently changed when Layla offered to help with carpool. And always with that same wide-eyed innocence. "Oh no. Did I get the date wrong again? I must be losing my mind." By the time Isla qualified for the solo category at Texas Rising, I was already double-checking everything myself, even when it made me feel paranoid. I didn't want to believe someone in my family would actively work against my daughter. But a week before the competition, Layla offered to help with the final costume pickup while I was at work. She said it so casually. I didn't want to seem ungrateful. The next day, the bodice had a faint but visible mark down the side seam, like something oily had touched it and dried. The designer said it was minor, fixable, and maybe it had been an accident. But my gut disagreed. Still, we moved forward. Isla kept rehearsing, and the studio buzzed with focus. I ironed that teal satin dress myself, the night before the big day, folded it into the garment bag with a trembling kind of pride, and whispered a silent prayer over the zipper. Everything felt ready, but I should have known. Just because you've done everything right doesn't mean someone else won't try to break you for it. The morning of the competition, I turned my back for 2 minutes. 2 minutes. I'd left Isla in the dressing room with Layla, thinking she was helping zip up the costume. I'd gone to get the hairspray. I forgot in the car. When I came back, the sound that met me, before I even opened the door, stopped me cold. It was the sound of fabric tearing. The moment I stepped back into the dressing room, every eye turned toward me. The air was thick with tension, and in the center of it stood Isla, frozen, her hands clenched at her sides. The teal dress, the one we'd spent weeks perfecting, hung half open from her shoulders. A jagged tear running down the left seam, right through the beaded detailing. A cluster of sequins had spilled to the floor like broken glass, glinting in the overhead light. Layla was beside her, one hand hovering over the ripped fabric, the other pressed dramatically to her chest, like she'd just witnessed a car crash. Her voice came first, light and tinged with just enough fake concern to make my stomach flip. "Oh no," she said. "I think my bracelet must have snagged on the fabric. These closures are so delicate." I was only trying to help zip her up. I didn't answer her right away. I looked at Isla first. Her face had gone pale, her lips trembling slightly, eyes wide but dry. Not a single tear, which somehow broke me more than if she'd sobbed. She was holding it in for me. For the performance, for the months of training. I stepped forward slowly, my hand shaking, as I reached for the torn seam. It was clean but deep, sliced in the exact spot that couldn't be hidden or repaired without obvious stitching. Not something that could be pinned or taped. This wasn't a tear from a clumsy wrist twist. It was placed, deliberate, surgical. I met Layla's eyes then. She didn't flinch, just tilted her head and whispered, "Well, at least the twins have a better chance now." It was low, just for me to hear. A razor behind a smile. For a few seconds, the world tilted. My brain screamed to confront her, to shout and call her what she was. But the only thing louder than my anger was my instinct to protect Isla. I couldn't make a scene. Not here. Not in front of the other girls. Not before a performance Isla had poured her heart into. I turned to her, gently guiding her into the bathroom with a quiet, "It's okay, sweetie. Let's just breathe for a minute." She followed without a word. And once the door closed, she leaned back against the wall and finally let out a long, shuddering breath. Still no tears. Just silence. I crouched in front of her, trying to find the right words. "We'll figure something out," I said, even though I didn't believe it. The clock was ticking. Isla was due to perform in under 2 hours. I called Evan, my voice low and clipped, explaining what had happened. He was already en route with our son and would be another 40 minutes at best. "Are you sure it was Layla?" he asked. And I felt a sting in my chest that he would even need to ask. She all but admitted it. I replied. She looked me in the eye and said now her girls had a better shot. There was a pause on the line. "What can I do from here?" he asked. I wanted to say fix it, undo it, but instead I just said, "Drive faster." I went back into the dressing room and opened our emergency kit. It had fabric tape, pins, thread, a needle, even glue. I tried everything. I taped the seam, but the fabric puckered. I pinned it, but the material was too delicate. I sewed a few loops, but it only made the tear more obvious. Every fix made it worse. One of the other moms, a kind woman named Grace, offered a spare leotard from her daughter's bag, but it didn't match Isla's routine, and it wouldn't pass the costuming rules. The judges were strict. Even a small irregularity could cost points, especially in a solo performance. Lila, of course, hovered nearby, offering tissues, clucking softly. "It's such a shame," she said loudly, to no one in particular. "Isla worked so hard. I hope this doesn't throw her off." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from screaming. Her twins sat quietly in the corner, clearly aware of the tension, but avoiding our eyes. Nova looked almost guilty. Noelle stared at the floor. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't about winning for Layla. It wasn't even about her daughters anymore. It was about control, about making sure no one else outshone her family, about power, dressed up in pastel compliments and PTA smiles. Time was running out. I tried calling Sophia, Isla's teacher, but she was backstage with another student. No answer. I tried Jude, an old friend of mine who used to design costumes for local productions, but his number went to voicemail. I checked the time again. 90 minutes until Isla was called. I felt panic rising. A dizzy sort of dread I hadn't known in years. My breath came fast, shallow. My hands were cold. And right as I was about to suggest we withdraw, Isla looked up at me with a strange calm. "Mom," she said, her voice low and steady, "I think it's time I show you something." At first, I thought she was joking. Maybe it was a defense mechanism. Some kind of brave face she was putting on to keep from falling apart. But Isla didn't smile, didn't blink. She stood up slowly, wiped her palms on the front of her leggings, and said, "Come with me." I followed her through the back hallway of the convention center, passing groups of dancers warming up and parents bustling with curling irons and garment bags. My mind couldn't quite catch up to what was happening. All I could think about was the ruined dress folded in my arms, and the fact that my daughter had been sabotaged just before the most important performance of her life. But Isla kept walking until we reached a row of lockers used by competitors and coaches. She knelt beside one near the end, entered a code I didn't know she had memorized, and opened the door. Inside was a garment bag I had never seen before. Simple, black, unmarked. Isla reached in and pulled it out carefully, then unzipped it in one smooth motion. A purple costume emerged. It shimmered softly in the fluorescent light, silver beading, catching the glow without being loud. The bodice was a slightly different cut than the teal one, but the overall silhouette was familiar. It looked like it had been made for her. I reached out to touch the fabric, and my fingers met material that was thick but flexible, strong yet elegant. "Where did this come from?" I asked. Still not fully processing, Isla looked up at me and said, "Me and Miss Sophia made it a few weeks ago, just in case." She went on to explain how she'd overheard Layla at a rehearsal, talking to Noelle and Nova when she thought no one was listening. She said she'd make sure I didn't outshine them again. Isla said. She laughed. It didn't sound like a joke. Instead of telling me, she had gone to Sophia, who took her seriously. Together, they designed an alternate version of the teal costume. Sophia called in a favor from an old costume designer she knew, and they used money Isla had saved from birthday cards and last year's recital prize to commission it in secret. "We didn't tell you," Isla said, "because we thought if you knew, Layla might find out too, and then she'd do something else we couldn't prepare for." I stared at my daughter, stunned into silence. She wasn't just brave, she was strategic. And it killed me a little that she'd had to learn that so young. I hugged her carefully, not wanting to disturb her stage makeup. I told her I was proud of her, not just for the dress, but for the maturity she had shown. "Are you sure it works with the routine?" I asked. Trying to be practical. "We adjusted some movements," she said. "The skirt flares a little differently, but Miss Sophia says it actually enhances the turns." I took another look. The way the silver threads wove through the bodice, catching light with every angle. I could already imagine it under stage lighting. It wasn't just good. It might be better than the original. We brought the costume back to the dressing room. Hidden under Isla's warm-up jacket, I carried the ripped teal dress in plain sight, making a show of folding it carefully. As if clinging to hope, Layla spotted us immediately. She scanned my face for signs of defeat, and I gave her just enough, a tired smile, a gentle shrug. The mask of quiet resignation. "Were you able to fix it?" she asked sweetly. I met her eyes and said, "We'll make do." She nodded with mock sympathy and turned back to her girls. Isla sat quietly, stretching her legs like nothing was wrong, while Sophia slipped in through the side entrance and gave her a subtle thumbs up. With 30 minutes to go, the backstage area was buzzing. The twins went on first. Their acro routine, sharp and polished. Layla hovered at the edge of the curtain, filming every second with her phone, whispering notes, as if she were the coach herself. When they exited, she gushed over them, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You nailed every turn. The judges couldn't take their eyes off you. This is your year." She said it just as Isla passed by on her way to the wings. Layla's eyes narrowed slightly, then flicked downward, probably expecting to see Isla in the damaged teal dress. But the warm-up jacket was still on. Isla didn't even look at her. Then, the announcer called Isla's name. In one swift motion, she removed the jacket and revealed the purple costume beneath. The shift in the room was immediate. A few dancers gasped. One mother elbowed her friend. Sophia stepped forward, adjusted a single strap, and whispered something only Isla could hear. I turned in time to catch Layla's reaction. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. She looked at the costume, then at me, then back at Isla, and for a split second, I saw it. Panic, confusion, disbelief. And we hadn't even started dancing yet. The moment Isla stepped onto the stage, everything else faded. It was like watching a completely different child taller somehow. Steadier. No trace of the stress she'd carried that morning. The lights warmed her features, and the purple dress caught the glow, like it had been made for that exact moment. Her arms rose with the first notes of music, slow and deliberate. And then the story began. She didn't just perform the choreography, she embodied it. Every movement spoke with clarity, each line of her body drawing emotion like a pen on paper. The judges leaned in almost immediately, not because of the costume, not because of any drama they might have heard about backstage, but because Isla was commanding the space like it belonged to her. I stood just off stage with Sophia, watching the girl I raised channel something beyond talent. Grace, one of the show organizers, had joined us quietly, clipboard in hand, expression unreadable. She nodded once during Isla's turning sequence, the one she and Sophia had adjusted for the purple dress. It looked even better than I'd imagined. The way the skirt floated, then snapped around her ankles with every spin. It was poetry in fabric. Isla landed each movement with precision, then transitioned seamlessly into a series of leaps that drew a spontaneous murmur from the crowd. And in the middle of it all, I caught a glimpse of Layla, standing beside her twins. Jaw tight, arms folded, in the hand holding her phone, visibly shaking. When the final note rang out and Isla struck her last pose, there was a moment of pure silence. Not awkward, not confused, just still. Then the applause started, loud and fast, quickly, turning into a standing ovation. Parents from other studios stood. Younger dancers clapped with wide eyes. Even a few of the judges exchanged quiet smiles. one of them scribbling something quickly on her scorecard. I exhaled a breath. I didn't realize I'd been holding for the last 3 minutes. Sophia smiled. That was Isla's best performance, she said softly. Not just technically. That was something else entirely. Backstage, Isla was mobbed by a few younger dancers, asking questions, complimenting her. She smiled and thanked them, her poise intact. But when she saw me, she dropped the act for just a second. I wrapped my arms around her and felt her body relax. You did it, I whispered, trying to keep my own voice steady. You didn't just survive. You soared. Isla leaned back and said, that felt free. Then she grinned. Also, I think Aunt Layla might actually explode. I smiled, but didn't reply. Part of me wanted to go confront Layla right then and there. Say everything I'd swallowed for years. But something about Ila's grace made me pause. She didn't need a dramatic showdown. She'd already won. The awards ceremony was scheduled for later in the afternoon. We used the break to grab food and water, sitting quietly in a corner of the building, away from the chaos. Layla didn't approach us. She sat with the twins, whispering rapidly, clearly agitated. At one point, I saw her get up and walk toward the judge's table, then stop herself and sit back down. She kept glancing at us, but now with less satisfaction and more calculation. I couldn't hear what she was saying to her daughters, but they looked uncomfortable, especially Nova. I noticed her pull away when Layla tried to fix her hair. The twins were talented. No doubt. Their performance had been strong, but there was a visible difference in how they carried themselves sharp, obedient, almost robotic. Isla, on the other hand, had made people feel something. When the time came to announce the winners, the room hushed quickly. The MC called out honorable mentions first, then third place. Second place went to a student from another studio we respected. A quiet girl with remarkable flexibility. Isla sat beside me, holding my hand tightly, eyes fixed straight ahead. And then the MC said, first place in junior contemporary solo, with a special commendation for performance artistry, Isla Stecker. The crowd clapped enthusiastically, but Isla didn't move at first. She blinked once, then turned to me like she needed permission to believe it. I nodded. She stood up, walked to the stage, and accepted the trophy with a calm grace that made my chest ache with pride. Layla's reaction was immediate. She stormed toward the registration table, her voice raised just enough for it to carry. She wasn't even wearing the registered costume. She snapped at the staff. This should be disqualified. They changed her look at the last second to manipulate the judges. Grace stepped forward calmly, her voice low but firm. Miss Chen. We were informed of the emergency costume change and approved it through proper protocol. The rules allow substitutions in the event of damage. Everything was handled correctly. Layla's mouth opened, then shut. For the first time in years, she didn't have a retort ready. Her eyes darted toward me, and I met her stare evenly, not with anger, but something worse. Indifference. She had tried to break us. And we hadn't just survived, we had done better than if she'd stayed out of it. As we left the venue that evening, Isla holding her trophy in one hand and my fingers in the other, she looked up at me and said, that purple dress might actually be luckier than the teal one. I smiled and said, no, honey, that wasn't luck. That was you being ready, no matter what. That night, back at home, the house felt strangely quiet despite the celebration. Isla's trophy stood in the center of the dining table, surrounded by half-eaten takeout and crumpled napkins. Evan had picked up her favorite pho on the way back and even brought home a slice of green tea cheesecake, which Isla poked at absently with her fork. It wasn't sadness. She was just processing. I could tell from the way she kept glancing at the trophy, like she still wasn't convinced it had really happened. Evan listened as we told him everything: the locker, the secret dress, The moment Layla saw it, he looked stunned for a while, then let out a low whistle. "That's next-level manipulation," he said. "Over a children's dance competition." I nodded but didn't say much. There was a quiet ache settling behind my ribs. Not anger anymore. Something closer to mourning. Because the truth is, when someone in your own family tries to destroy your child's moment, not out of necessity, but from insecurity, something dies between you that's hard to revive. Evan finally said what I had been avoiding. "We can't pretend this didn't happen. I think we need to talk to Jacob." Jacob was my brother, Layla's husband, and for most of our lives, we had been close in that easy, sibling way. But since marrying Layla, he had become more distant, always trying to keep the peace while looking the other way. I wasn't sure if he would believe me. I wasn't even sure if he wanted to. The next morning, before I could decide how to approach the conversation, I got a message from Nova. It was short and simple. "I'm really sorry about what happened. You and Isla didn't deserve that. We didn't know she would do that." I stared at the words for a long time, torn between heartbreak and relief. The twins weren't the problem. They were caught in it like everyone else. I replied gently, thanking her, telling her that Isla would love to hang out sometime if she ever wanted space from the madness. Nova wrote back with a single heart emoji, and I knew that was her way of saying more than she could put into words. Later that week, I agreed to meet Jacob for coffee. We picked a small cafe on the east side, one we used to go to when we were teenagers. He looked tired when he walked in, older than usual, like the weight of everything was finally settling on his shoulders. He didn't waste time. "She told me it was an accident," he said. But then Nova came to me crying, saying she saw Layla do it on purpose, and that she bragged afterward. His voice cracked slightly on the last sentence. I don't know what to do anymore. I didn't gloat. I didn't say "I told you so." I just stirred my coffee and said, "What would you do if it were someone else's wife doing that to your daughter?" Jacob nodded slowly. "I know." Then he added, "Nova's been asking to transfer to a different studio. She says she doesn't want to dance for her mom anymore." That hit me harder than I expected. Because under all the competition and choreography, these were still kids. Kids trying to find their voices, while the adults around them drowned them out with ambition. Layla didn't apologize. Not directly. But a week later, she sent a group message to the whole family thread. It was vague, laced with words like misunderstandings, emotional day, and we all want what's best for the girls. I didn't respond. Neither did Jacob. I noticed Nova had left the thread entirely. Isla, meanwhile, I had gone back to class with a quiet sense of focus. She didn't brag about the win. She didn't even mention Layla anymore. But she kept the purple dress hanging on the inside of her closet door, not folded, not packed away, just there, like a quiet reminder of what she had endured and overcome. Sophia invited her to help assist in the beginner class the following Saturday. I watched from the hallway as Isla knelt beside a nervous 7-year-old who couldn't get her arms right. Isla didn't correct her harshly. She just whispered something. I did the move beside her slowly, then clapped when the girl copied it successfully. I realized then that Isla wasn't just a dancer anymore. She was becoming a leader, someone who understood what it meant to stumble and stand again. That weekend, we received an email from the State Youth Dance Organization. Isla had been nominated for their Emerging Artist program. Based on judges' recommendations from the Invitational SIL, it came with a partial scholarship to a 6-week summer intensive and mentoring from choreographers who had worked on Broadway and national tours. She read the email twice, then looked up and said, "I want to go, but only if Sophia can help me prep." I nodded. "Of course, we'll make it happen." As we packed up her things later that evening, Isla paused in front of the torn teal dress, which I had folded and stored in a separate garment bag. "Do you want to keep it?" I asked. She nodded. "Yeah. I don't hate it. It reminds me that I'm ready for anything now. By the time Isla started her summer program, our household rhythm had changed completely. Morning stretches became earlier, mealtimes became lighter, and there was a quiet determination in her that hadn't existed before. Not ambition exactly, but clarity. She didn't dance to prove anything to anyone anymore. Not to the judges, not to the other moms, not even to Layla. She danced because she knew she could say something without words, and that realization had settled into her bones like gravity. Sophia helped her prep for the new routine, something far more advanced than anything Isla had ever performed. The choreography was layered with shifts in tempo and emotional cues that couldn't be faked. It required trust, physical trust in her body, and emotional trust in the story she was telling. I sat in on a few rehearsals, quietly taking notes from the corner. Sometimes I caught Sophia watching Isla with an expression I couldn't name, like she was seeing not just a student but a peer in the making. Layla kept her distance. At least publicly. She didn't attend any of the summer showcases. Though her twins performed in one of them as part of their new acro duo, Jacob came instead, alone, and stood awkwardly near the back. He clapped for Isla, like he was trying to make up for something, and I didn't hold that against him. People come to clarity in different ways. For Jacob, it took his daughter crying to get there. For me, it took a tear in a dress I had guarded, like armor. And for Isla, it took watching someone try to sabotage her and realizing she didn't need to shrink just to stay safe. A few weeks into the program, Isla was asked to participate in a special mentorship track. Only 5 students in the entire state had been offered the opportunity. She didn't brag. She didn't even tell me right away. I found out when Sophia pulled me aside after class and said, she didn't want to make a big deal of it. But I think you should know. They chose her for her control, her storytelling, and her professionalism, not just the talent. I didn't say anything at first. I just looked through the window at Isla, who was helping another girl fix a bun that had come loose during warm-up. It was small, ordinary, but it told me everything. I began noticing other things, too. Like how Isla now handled discomfort with silence instead of panic, how she no longer reacted to gossip or small slights the way some of the other girls did. Once, when a parent made a snide comment within earshot something about how some kids had unfair access to private teachers, Isla didn't even flinch. Later, I asked if it bothered her. She just shrugged and said, "I'd rather they talk than try to rip my dress again." Her words weren't bitter, just honest. And I knew in that moment that Layla hadn't taken anything from her. If anything, she had sharpened something in Isla that couldn't be undone. Around the same time, we began receiving more invitations. Not just competitions, but workshops, regional collaborations, even a guest performance for a nonprofit event supporting youth in the arts. One of the program directors called to say Isla had left a strong impression not just because of her technique, but because of how she interacted with others. "She's already mentoring the younger girls," the woman said. "You don't teach that. It shows up when a kid has seen enough to understand how much kindness matters in this world." Of course, not everything was perfectly resolved. Layla still posted selectively filtered photos of her daughter's routines, complete with long captions about resilience and champion mindsets. But something had shifted in her tone. There was less edge, less performative sparkle. Whether it came from shame, therapy, or simply exhaustion, I didn't know. But she hadn't spoken directly to Isla since the competition, and I was okay with that. Some relationships don't need closure. They just need distance. Then, unexpectedly, Nova reached out again. This time, it wasn't just a message. She asked if Isla could help her with an audition video for a scholarship program their school had recommended. "Mom says it's not worth it," Nova wrote. "But I think I want to try anyway." I let Isla read the message first. She looked up at me and asked, Can we help her? And that was it. No resentment. No hesitation. We drove over the next day, met Nova at the library, and spent 2 hours helping her refine her solo. Isla never brought up the past. She just taught, encouraged, and laughed like nothing had ever been broken. That night, as we got into the car, Isla leaned her head against the window and said quietly, "You know, I used to think being good at dance meant beating other people. Now I just want to get better at telling the truth with my body. I want to make people feel something they didn't know they needed." I didn't say anything for a long time. Then I reached over and squeezed her hand. "You already are." A few weeks before the fall showcase, Sophia gathered a small group of students, including Isla, for a special rehearsal at the studio. This wasn't just for polishing technique or refining choreography. It was a test run for the final casting of the centerpiece number, a high-level group piece titled "The Line Between." It blended contemporary and lyrical elements, with multiple solos woven through an ensemble that required timing as tight as trust. Sophia had built it for her strongest dancers, and Isla had been given one of the emotional-led sequences. It was the kind of opportunity that meant exposure, mentorship invitations, and future recommendations, if done right. I stayed quiet during most rehearsals now, usually seated in the back with a thermos of green tea, and my planner, pretending not to watch every movement too closely. But on that day, something shifted in the air as soon as the studio door opened and Layla walked in. She wasn't alone. Nova and Noelle were with her, both carrying dance bags, both clearly tense. Layla approached Sophia with her usual tight-lipped smile and said, "We thought we'd stop by. The girls have been working hard at home and wanted to see the routine live before it's finalized." Her tone was neutral, but every word landed with intent. Sophia didn't flinch. "This is a closed rehearsal," she replied calmly. "But if the girls are considering auditioning, they're welcome to observe quietly from the back." Layla nodded, though I saw her jaw tighten slightly. She turned to her daughters, who exchanged uncertain glances, then took seats near the mirror wall. I watched Isla glance in their direction just once before refocusing on her cue. No change in expression, no stiffness in her posture. That quiet resolve had become second nature. The routine began, and as the music filled the room, I watched Isla move like she belonged in that spotlight. There was something effortless about the way she flowed through the transitions, not because they were easy, but because she made them look that way. At one point, during a turning lift, the music cut out unexpectedly. A glitch in the Bluetooth connection. The room fell silent for half a beat. But the dancers didn't break formation. Isla kept moving, adjusting the tempo of her breath and motion until Sophia stepped in and clapped rhythmically to carry the beat. It was a small moment, but telling. Grace under pressure. Again, the kind that stays in people's minds long after the applause fades. When the rehearsal ended, Sophia called Isla over quietly. I couldn't hear the entire exchange, but I caught the part that mattered. "You held the line. That's what separates dancers from performers. You didn't just recover. You led." Isla nodded, thanked her, and walked back to grab her things without fanfare. On the way out, she passed by Layla and the twins. No tension, no eye contact, just silence. But I saw Layla's eyes narrow as Isla walked past, and I recognized that look. It was the same one she wore the day Isla took the stage in the purple dress. Not anger, not regret, just disbelief that her tactics had stopped working. That evening, as we sat at the kitchen table eating leftover stir-fry, Isla brought it up without me prompting. "Aunt Layla's not done," she said, picking at a piece of tofu. "She's waiting for something, watching for a crack." I didn't respond right away, because she wasn't wrong. Some people aren't looking to rebuild trust. They're waiting for proof that your success was a fluke. I finally said, "That's why we don't give her one." Isla looked up, nodded once, then went back to eating. And that was that. A few days later, Sophia emailed us about the final casting. Isla had been selected to open the number with a solo vignette, a subtle, emotionally loaded sequence that set the tone for the whole piece. Sophia said it would only work if the dancer could connect fully with the audience from the first breath. Isla understands stillness, she explained. That's rare. The fall showcase was shaping up to be something special, with scouts from multiple youth conservatories planning to attend. There would be video reels sent out afterward, and Sophia had even hired a filmmaker to capture the entire event. It wasn't just a recital, it was an audition for the future. Word got around, as it always does. One of the studio moms mentioned to me, in a voice that was half warning and half apology, that Layla had started asking pointed questions about the showcase lineup. Who got solos? Who had private coaching? Who was being filmed? She even implied the process wasn't fair. I smiled politely, thanked her for the heads up, and made a note to speak with Sophia. Not because I was worried, but because I knew Layla. She didn't like systems she couldn't control. And she hated stories where she wasn't the center of attention. What she didn't realize was that this story had moved on without her. The day of the fall showcase arrived with the kind of stillness that made everything feel sharper. The air was cool, overcast. No dramatic sunrise or fanfare, just quiet streets, and a sky the color of soft stone. Isla woke up early, braided her own hair, and packed her dance bag with the kind of precision you'd expect from someone twice her age. She didn't ask me to check anything, which was a first. She didn't need me to. Her playlist played low through her headphones as she moved around the house, not rushed, just focused. I watched from the kitchen, sipping my coffee, struck by how much she'd changed, not just as a dancer, but as a person who knew how to carry her own weight without resentment. At the venue, things unfolded in the usual controlled chaos. Dancers arriving in waves, costume bags slung over shoulders, teachers coordinating stage time, while parents hovered near mirrors with curling wands and safety pins. I kept my distance, having learned that Isla performed better when I wasn't micromanaging. Sophia greeted her with a firm hug, gave her one last note about breath control during the final beat of her solo, and handed over a tiny charm stitched into a cloth wrap. For grounding, she said. Don't look at the crowd. Look through them. Isla smiled, tucked it into her costume bag, and walked to warm up without hesitation. Layla was there. Of course she was. She hadn't RSVP'd officially, but no one was surprised when she showed up flanked by Noelle and Nova, both dressed in black rehearsal sets. Even though they weren't performing, her presence carried the same brittle energy. It always had polite smiles that ended a second too early, greetings that doubled as passive assessments. She waved to a few parents, asked vague questions about who had solos, then made her way to the front row of the main performance hall as if she belonged there. I watched her the way I used to watch the oven during soufflé prep, quietly, carefully, knowing any sudden movement might make something collapse. Backstage, Isla waited for her cue, with her warm-up jacket zipped all the way to her chin, headphones still in, and hands tucked into her sleeves. Her body was still, but her eyes were alert, tracking the stagehands and dancers like she was reading a map. The stage manager gave the 2-minute warning, and Isla stood, removed her jacket, and nodded once to Sophia. Then she walked out into the lights. No hesitación, no theatrics, just quiet confidence wrapped in clean movement. The opening bars of music were sparse, almost like silence in motion. Isla stood center stage, one foot slightly behind the other, her head bowed. When she began to move, it wasn't with the intention of entertaining. It was with the intention of telling the truth. Her solo was built around contrast, fragility, and strength, stillness and reach, contraction and expansion. It wasn't showy. There were no unnecessary tricks. But every movement was intentional, and every beat carried weight. The purple dress caught the light in a way that made it feel alive. But it never stole the attention from her body. It supported her, like good design should. Halfway through, something happened that I didn't expect. Layla stood up. Not all the way, but enough to shift in her seat, craning her neck as if looking for something she didn't quite believe she was seeing. I watched her eyes follow Isla's every movement, narrowing as if trying to find the flaw. There wasn't one. Not in the kind of way Layla understood. Anyway, there was no stumble to exploit. No costume misstep. No missed beat to weaponize later. Isla was composed. Raw, in the right ways. Structured in all the places that mattered. When the solo ended, the audience held their applause for half a beat too long. The kind of pause that told me they'd been holding their breath. Then the clapping came. Slow at first, then building, and finally breaking into something that felt less like politeness and more like gratitude. I stood up without realizing it. So did Sophia, even Grace, who rarely showed open emotion at these events, nodded in approval from the tech booth. It wasn't just a good performance. It was a statement. Backstage, Isla returned with her jacket slung over one shoulder, face flushed but calm. She didn't ask how it went. She didn't need to. Sophia touched her shoulder lightly and said, "That solo is going to follow people home." Isla nodded once, took a sip of water, and asked if she had time to stretch before the ensemble number. No ego. No dramatics. Just preparation. Later, during intermission, I stepped into the hallway for air. Layla found me there. She walked up slowly, holding a half-empty cup of coffee, eyes unreadable. For a moment, I wondered if she was going to apologize. Instead, she said, "You got lucky with that child." Her tone was flat. Not cruel, not complimentary, just tired. I looked at her and replied evenly. It wasn't luck. It was every moment you didn't break her that made her stronger. She didn't answer, just turned and walked away. By the end of the evening, the fall showcase had finished to roaring applause, several callbacks, and no shortage of whispered questions from parents about scholarship tracks and agency scouts. Isla didn't stay for the crowd. She packed her bag quietly, accepted a few hugs from classmates, thanked the tech crew, and ducked out the side door with Sophia and me before the lobby could fill. On the way to the car, she carried her jacket over her shoulder like a dancer, twice her age, and said, "It felt clean. Like I told it exactly the way it lives in my body." I smiled, letting the warmth of those words settle. She wasn't talking about choreography anymore. She was talking about integrity. And that kind of awareness wasn't something you could teach. It came from being hurt, staying soft, and surviving anyway. The next morning, Sophia sent over a copy of the performance footage with a simple subject line. "For your records. Or your heart." I watched it alone in the kitchen before anyone else woke up. It was even more powerful on screen. The camera caught details I hadn't noticed in person, the flick of Isla's wrist at the final crescendo, and the way her face changed just slightly during the turn sequence, how she held stillness like a dancer who understood that movement only matters when silence frames it. I cried, not from sadness, but from release, because I realized something I hadn't before. Layla didn't just lose that day. She lost her power over us, the moment Isla stopped needing her approval, or her rivalry, to shine. By midweek, and the video had started circulating through the local studio network. It wasn't viral in the TikTok sense, but it moved quietly and fast, reaching program directors, instructors, even a few minor talent scouts. The studio's inbox began filling with questions about Ila's availability for youth company auditions and short-term residency programs. She wasn't overwhelmed, which surprised me. She just asked Sophia to help her sort through what aligned with her goals. "I don't want to just dance everywhere," she told me. "I want to dance where the stories matter." That kind of discernment? At 12, I felt like watching someone leaf through their future while staying completely grounded in their present. Layla didn't contact us directly, but I heard from another mom that she had quietly pulled her twins from 2 upcoming events. There was no big announcement, no dramatic fallout, just a slow retreat from the spotlight she once chased so aggressively. I saw Nova one afternoon at the studio, waiting for a friend. She smiled, hugged Isla, and gave me a quick wave. When I asked how she was doing, she said, "It's Keter at home lately. I think we all needed that." I didn't press. Sometimes silence was a better answer than a story. Later that week, Jakob invited us over for dinner. Nothing formal, just tacos and board games. The twins were there, but Layla wasn't. When I asked casually, Jacob said, "She's been going to counseling. Real one this time. By herself." I didn't offer an opinion. I just nodded. People change when they're ready, not when you need them to. That night, watching Isla laugh through a round of Uno, while Nova tried to cheat with her feet under the table, I realized something deeper. Isla had come full circle, from that ripped dress in a crowded dressing room, to this quiet kitchen where she was no longer defined by what had been taken from her, but by everything she had chosen to become. Instead, we drove home under soft fall light. Isla fell asleep in the back seat, her hair still pinned from rehearsal, her face peaceful in the way only kids who finally exhaled can manage. I kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other loosely curled around the strap of her dance bag, tucked beside me, like it had always been part of the journey. And in that quiet, I thought of every mother who's ever watched her child get sabotaged, underestimated, excluded, or dismissed. I thought of all the times I wanted to scream in defense, to fight fire with fire, to prove our worth through someone else's defeat. But Isla had done something better. She'd made her talent louder than the sabotage, her preparation sharper than the gossip, her grace more lasting than the bitterness. And in doing so, she hadn't just won, she'd rewritten what winning looked like. A month later, I found the purple dress again. It was tucked gently in the back of Isla's closet, still clean, still intact, still carrying that quiet defiance in every stitched seam. I hadn't touched it since the showcase. Not because I was avoiding it, but because some things need time before you understand their full weight. Isla walked in while I held it up to the light, the soft fabric catching just enough of the sun from the hallway to make it shimmer like memory. She didn't say anything right away, just looked at it, then at me, then said, "I think I'm ready to let it go." We didn't donate it. We didn't burn it in some symbolic gesture. We folded it together, carefully, and placed it in a memory box alongside her first pair of ballet slippers. A handwritten note Sophia had given her during the summer intensive, and the charm she wore during the fall showcase, not as a monument to pain, but as a record of her becoming because that's what this entire story had really been. Not about Layla, not about revenge, but about what it takes to grow through something unfair without letting it turn you cruel. People still talk about the performance, especially inside the regional dance circuit. Sophia's studio received more applications than ever that winter. Many from families who said they'd been looking for a place where grit and grace mattered more than medals. I smiled when I read that phrase on the studio's new website banner, because I knew exactly where it had come from. It was something Isla once said during a feedback session when asked what she thought dance was for. She answered, "To make people feel seen, even when no one's looking." That line stuck with people. It stuck with me. As for Layla, she didn't re-enter our lives in any real way. There was no final confrontation, no apology arc, no attempt at forced reconciliation. And I'm glad there wasn't. Closure doesn't always come through words. Sometimes, it comes through silence, through distance, through no longer needing the person who once tried to dim your light to validate your worth. I heard from Jacob that she'd scaled back her involvement with the dance world, that the girls had started taking workshops in other creative fields, visual art, theater, even creative writing. Nova sent Isla a poem once, a short one, about resilience and rhythm and breaking cycles. She never mentioned her mom. She didn't need to. One rainy afternoon, Isla and I went out for tea after rehearsal. We sat by the window, watching car pass in quiet patterns, the city moving like a metronome. She had her journal open and was sketching formations for a new routine she was choreographing for the younger girls' winter showcase. I asked what it was about. She said, "It's called the still part. It's for the ones who always thought they had to be loud to matter." I looked at her, this girl who used to doubt herself for being quiet, who once shrank in the presence of louder adults, who had her voice nearly stolen by someone in her own family, and I realized she hadn't just found her power. She'd built it piece by piece, through every setback, every hurt, and every moment, she chose grace over drama. And that's what stayed with me. Not the trophies, not the standing ovations, but the stillness she claimed for herself, the way she moved through the world now not to be seen, but to see, to lift, to teach, to create. There's something deeply unshakable about a girl who's been broken publicly and still chooses softness over spectacle. So yes, if just hours before my daughter's big dance competition, my sister-in-law ripped her dress on purpose. She tried to derail a moment that wasn't hers to begin with. But Isla didn't just recover. She rewrote the narrative. She didn't retaliate. She rose. She danced in a different dress, built her name without dragging someone else's down, and walked away with more than just a title. She walked away, knowing she didn't have to scream to be heard. And me. I walked away with the clearest lesson of all: your silence, your kindness, and your quiet preparation. They may never trend, but they endure. They echo. So, if you're out there, wondering if staying graceful in the face of betrayal is enough, wondering if being the bigger person is just another way of letting people off the hook, I'll ask you this: what if grace isn't weakness? What if it's the strongest kind of revenge there is?